This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
The plot thickens. I was going to go into a long tangent about how people just need to show up and do their frickin' jobs. But I don't want to go into a 45-minute rant about lazy people. Instead, I'll just give you my dad lesson for the week. Kids, show up to work, do your job, get paid, get laid, call it a night. It's worked for our ancestors for thousands of years. It should work in 2024. If only that were remotely true. So wrestling, that's what this channel's about, right? Sometimes even I have to question that. So welcome everyone to the Five Starr Wrestling Report. Mondays and Fridays we are here on YouTube and Rumble. I know I always bore people with the logistics, but I have to mention it anyway. Comment, like, subscribe, whatever other buttons exist out there on video streaming platforms, click it. Except the red button, don't click that. We got the regular Friday show today, classic reviews, all the fun stuff. I do have it on the agenda. I was going to do a brief rundown of how I'm going to plan for this weekend, but I think I'll save that for the end of the show because I kind of want to get things rolling here to try to keep my energy up while I still have it. I know some of you may wonder, this is you when you have a lot of energy? The answer is yes. For 9:30 in the morning. So, Crockett TV, here we go. No wasted motion. So, last week's program was the longest television show in modern recorded history. Meaning that it was a 90-minute show that felt like double the length. Probably because nothing of substance really happened on last week's program. The two big things they were pushing headed into this week were the Philly live event, where we saw the six-man titles change hands. And we also had the Omni House show in Atlanta, where we learned that some interesting things took place. Most notably in the cage match with Luger and Ole versus Tully and Arn. So headed into this week, the only thing we really had on the radar, aside from the follow-up with those events, were the upcoming details of the 1988 Crockett Cup, which they informed us would be talked about next week. So, well, what did that leave us for this week's program in terms of riveting, exciting content? The answer was not much. The opener was the Varsity Club versus Max MacGyver and Kurt Thompson. Current story they're still pushing with this group is Sullivan's attempts to recruit new members. Right now we've got Mike Rotunda and Rick Steiner as the regular tag team, with Sullivan mostly playing cheerleader on the side. As always, it's fun watching legit former amateur athletes beat up green job guys who have no idea what they're doing. In the case of Rotunda, he had done multiple amateur takedown spots in MacGyver and Thompson in this match, He may as well have been wrestling fucking blow-up dolls. These guys were totally out to lunch, had no idea how to bump for him, no idea how to feed, no clue what they were supposed to do. It was phenomenal. Meanwhile, Steiner's in there doing his regular thing where he picks dudes up and throws them around for a while, not giving a crap where or how they land. How nobody died here, I will never know. There were also multiple spots where Steiner kept grabbing at MacGyver's teeth, pretending he was brushing them. He did this like 3 or 4 times during the match. And then he eventually put MacGyver away with, as I wrote down, some kind of modified chicken wing submission hold, but not really. I'm thinking Teddy may have done a mercy call. Or maybe just got bored and stopped the match. Because this did go on for like 6 minutes, and I have no idea why. I mean, it got redundant after about minute 3. But then again, they got 2 hours plus commercial. Got to kill time somehow. And then they did this really wacky promo afterwards where, again, I can merely define the segment as they needed to kill some time. You got Sullivan there telling a story about mass extinction, saying this is what the varsity club is founded on. And this part was great. While he's rambling about God knows what, bringing up all these weird species of animals that got run off the face of the planet, he finally gets to talking about the dodo bird. And Rick Steiner, deadpan, interrupts him and screams, "The what?" And Rotunda has to butt in by going, "The dodo. You know, the bird." To which Steiner began making chicken cluck signs with his hands. That part was at least funny. Rick Steiner just screaming, "What?" in the middle of Sullivan's diatribe about random shit that nobody was paying attention to. They also talked about Jimmy Garvin for a little bit here. By that point, I had already kind of stopped taking notes, so I don't even remember what they were talking about. But that was the first 10 minutes of this week's episode. A varsity club squash plus Kevin Sullivan talking about dead animals. 1988 was a rough year, ladies and gentlemen. And then we came back for a Shane Douglas squash with Thunderfoot number 2. Another young relative newcomer to the Crockett area. Although we had already seen UWF clips of him throughout 87 when he was working with guys like Eddie Gilbert and Terry Taylor. So, it's not like we've never seen the guy before. I believe voted the 1986 Rookie of the Year. He was, well, it was weird. JR said that he was 19 or 20 years old here, but I thought that seemed kind of odd, so I went to look it up. He was born in 1964, so he would have been 24 at the time of this taping. Maybe I just misheard the context. Perhaps Jim was talking about how young he was when he first broke into the business. Because now that I think of it, Shane had actually started training when he was like fresh out of college, right? Or maybe it was during his college years. He was trained by Dominic DiNucci, another Pittsburgh native. It's cool too. I'm going to get sidetracked for a minute here. Is a PA homestead. Like when you look back and see Shane was born in New Brighton, which is a borough in Beaver County. And you see he trained with Dominic, who actually lived in the Freedom area. It's cool. I service a lot of schools in the Beaver County area, so I pass through those areas pretty much every week. Like Freedom, New Brighton, Center, Alquippa, Hopewell. I don't think I've really branched too far out beyond the Lincoln Park area. Because then you're starting to get into like Blackhawk territory, and that's really stretching the state lines at that point. But it's weird too, because over the years, they always say Shane was born in Pittsburgh, but I mean, it's not really accurate. He was more like born in the outskirts of Pittsburgh. Like me, for example, I was basically born in the heart of the area, so I consider myself a Pittsburgh native through and through. Kurt Angle is kind of the same thing. Yeah, but some of the guys that grew up in places like Beaver County areas, or like even some of the Washington County areas like Cannonsburg, McMurray, Claysville, Avella. I mean, it's not Pittsburgh per se, because then you're getting into municipality discussions. In any case, I think we were talking about wrestling here. Well, Shane Douglas looked quite youthful. I guess all that raging and screaming gave him wrinkles over the next 10 or so years. Boy, did that guy age. Like in 1988, he looked 24. By 1998, he looked about 50. What happened? Might have been those ECW shows that added to the aging process. I can imagine. Working for Paul Heyman all those years, yeah, that'll do a number on you. But what a hell of an athlete that guy was. You know, at the time, a crowd-favorite babyface. He was doing all the flashy offense here. He went over with a belly-to-belly, and you had Jim Ross doing the comparisons to Magnum TA, so that was kind of cool. You know, obviously Jim had firsthand experience watching Magnum in Midsouth when he first broke in, so he saw a lot of similarities between him and Shane. You know, brings a tear to your eye hearing Jim talk about Magnum TA and all the promising things he saw in Magnum from a young age. Just a few short years later, it all went up in smoke. Now, thankfully for Shane, he didn't suffer the same fate. He just got progressively angrier and more unpleasant to work with. Now, the one thing I can never take away from Shane Douglas, though, even from a young age, the guy was a hell of a talker. Very natural, fluid speaker. He mainly talked at ringside here about training with Magnum TA and learning some life lessons along the way. You know, David Crockett hinted at Magnum when he told Shane that he's seen that belly-to-belly move before, and that kind of stirred up the conversation. Shane also talked about Flair, said he's not unbeatable, especially with a guy like Sting on his trail. That was all well and good. Come to think of it, even a semi-blown-up Shane Douglas could still get his promo out. I cannot say the same for Ricky Santana, who, for God knows what reason, was just kind of awkwardly standing there with David and Shane. My notes for his promo consist of the following two sentences. Ricky speaks in Spanish and nobody cares. Go away, Ricky. He said he wants to be Shane's tag partner. Why? God only knows. And even so, I don't think God himself would care. So that brought us to the first pre-tape recap on this program. In the cold open, we saw brief footage of Sting and Flair going at it on one of the TBS syndicated programs. Had to have been the Sunday taping. And we heard Flair tell Jim Crockett that he wanted Sting in the ring on television. And boy, did Flair get it. He got the stinger at full throttle, brother. And, you know, it is kind of funny how people often remember the Flair versus Sting match from the Clash of Champions show from March of '88. That was like the big heavyweight title showdown, the one that put Sting on the map, mostly because they did the 45-minute Broadway. The one they did here, I think, was more of an extended angle to build the anticipation for the eventual blow-off about a month or so down the road. You know, it's still the majority of every Sting-Flair match we've ever seen. Sting dominates Flair for like 90% of it, beats him up nonstop. Flair's bumping around like a pinball machine, selling his ass off. They're doing everything to make Sting look like $1 million. This time, however, their angle coming out of it was Sting coming off the top with a cross body dive, which inadvertently took out Tommy Young. And while he tries to send in Hebner to finish officiating the match, J.J. Dillon gets involved and then runs Hebner into the ring post, which then allows for J.J. to try to get in the ring to pry Sting off of Flair, who had him hooked up in the Scorpion. And it all leads to a bunch of the baby faces coming out to cut the Horsemen off with the pass. They surround Flair and Sting like a chain link fence. You know, the Horsemen are doing the standoff with them. But they cannot break through the pact. They cannot help out their fellow comrade, who is laying there defenseless in the Scorpion Deathlock. So while Flair's stuck there screaming to the top of his lungs, Sting desperately trying to keep himself propped up. It was a hell of a struggle. But eventually the heels are able to pull Flair out to safety. And again, he's down on the ground selling his knee like he'd been completely shattered off the bone. Arn and JJ on the floor staring a hole through guys like Barry and Luger. You know, it's one of those TV moments where, as a fan watching for the first time, you're like, shit, dude. This rookie just took it to the world heavyweight champion and had him dead to rights. Like, had it not been for the interference, Sting would be the new champion right now. You know, and he kind of addressed that in his follow-up promo where he told Flair that it was oh so sweet having him trapped in that Scorpion, begging for his life. But it won't be the last time he finds himself in that hold. Now, yes, you can make the valid argument. Okay, why was Sting super happy during this promo when he just got fucked out of winning the world title? Shouldn't he be pissed off? Well, ideally, yes. However, based on the story they told here, they pretty much let you in on the fact that Sting had Flair's number, and he's pretty much had Flair's number since day one. So even though Sting didn't leave with the belt per se, you did kind of get that understanding that when they eventually go at it again down the road, Sting will have Flair in the same vulnerable state. And that's been the track record of everything they've done with the Flair-Sting feud thus far. Flair just can't get the better of Sting no matter what the situation is. It's like the Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner dynamic where poor Coyote just keeps getting humiliated over and over and over again. But the people love it because Flair's the villain. And whenever he gets embarrassed, he knows how to sell it. So this was well done. But it's not where the Horseman drama ends on this program, because there's a couple other young cats on this show that have their sights set on gold, including Mr. Ron Simmons, who wrestled Dave Isley this week. Spent a few minutes twisting Isley into a pretzel with various mat holds. Eventually went over with a somewhat mistimed shoulder block off the middle rope. But we won't hold it against him. Isley was out of place for it. It was his fault. More to come on the Ron Simmons stuff a bit later on, though. They followed that with a Larry Zbyszko baby doll promo, continuing to withhold this confidential information on Dusty Rhodes. These very secret, disturbing photos that Baby Doll's been concealing from the public eye. By the way, I love that she's now moved these photos to a large white envelope that simply reads, confidential. Like she works for the fucking FBI. She says that even Larry doesn't know what these photos look like. That is how disturbing they are. And then Larry starts talking about how Politicians at least have the common decency to resign from their position whenever they're exposed for carrying dirt. Which is a fucking bold-faced lie if I've ever heard it. Are you kidding? Politicians voluntarily resigning from their positions for having been exposed for fraud? Who the hell's Larry listening to? Lamestream media? But he tells Dusty to follow the path of lying politicians, give up the U.S. title and accept the humiliation. They've got him under a barrel and now he needs to face the music. Yeah, okay, dude. I'll believe anything Larry says after that political statement. Then we had Eddie Gilbert versus George South. It's almost a carbon copy of everything I said about Eddie's match last week. Good, solid wrestling. Nothing wrong with the match. But it's the literal definition of just a match that existed on the show. They've done nothing with Eddie Gilbert since they broke him off from Terry Taylor. He's just out there every week wrestling 5-minute TV matches that don't really move the needle. Now, I understand that doesn't last forever. You know, they eventually start getting him involved in the Horseman stuff later on. But for where we are right now, this is kind of the status quo Eddie Gilbert segment on TV. Wrestles a match, evidently wins. That's all there is to say about it. And then we quickly move from that to this Dusty Rhodes interview. Now, earlier on the show, the announcers had mentioned something about an unlikely alliance forming in the Omni. A tag team combination that nobody thought was possible, given their checkered past. Now we know who that unlikely duo consists of. And while Dusty's talking about all the dates and the locations that dues will be paid, daddy. Dues will be heavily paid on the 27th of February in the Omni, because it'll be Flair, Tully, and Arn squaring off in a cage with Luger, Dusty, and Ole Anderson. You heard that right. They made amends. The long-storied hatred between Dusty and Ole, the rivalry that Dusty claimed on national cable television would never be over. Well, it's over. At least temporarily. You know, Dusty talks about how it was only a mere 4 years ago where he lay in the middle of the Omni inside that cage when the Horseman targeted his leg and tried to end his career for good. Now we find ourselves in a situation where Ole and Dusty have patched up their differences with the mission to take down the Horseman in the same venue where the feud began. How's that for long-term storytelling? And that will all take place on February 27th. But this is where things get really hot and spicy. Before they cut the commercial break, out walks Baby Doll to strut her stuff in Dusty's face, sending him a warning message that if Dusty doesn't comply and give Larry that title shot, she will let those confidential pictures loose. And of course, Dusty's laughing it off, flipping his baseball cap backwards and trying to play the whole thing for giggles. He tells Baby Doll that once upon a time, he won her services for 30 days. Apparently, she forgot that also accounted for 30 nights, too. And as for Larry, he should at least be man enough to know that he shouldn't send a woman out to handle his business. Well then, that got saucy in a hurry. Dusty wasn't playing around here. I think he's encouraging Baby Doll to let those images out in the open. Fuck it, dude, why not? I mean, everybody else in the studio knows she's a slut. May as well embrace it. Now see, this is where Baby Doll is a little ignorant. She knows Dusty's been around the party scene before. He knows the game. Come on now. She should have known better. But this all led into Larry's match with Trent Knight. Pretty cut and dry performance here. I mean, Larry knows how to get the most out of doing very little. Spends a while playing with Trent and trash-talking the crowd. Fans were chanting something derogatory at Baby Doll here, but couldn't quite catch what it was. I remember Larry going, "These people have no manners." So it must have been quite pejorative. But Larry ends up going over with a neck breaker. And that led to this iconic, horrible Paul Jones Army promo at the booth. The exact kind of comic relief I needed at this point in the program. And it didn't disappoint. I mean, this was some classic Paul Jones shit right here, let me tell you. Now, first of all, it should be noted, the Powers of Pain just won the six-man tag team championships from the Road Warriors and Dusty the previous weekend. So while Paul's ripping them and putting over his men, at the booth is the Warlord, Ivan Koloff, and Paul Jones himself. No Barbarian. At first I figured, okay, well maybe he's in the ring getting ready to wrestle. And then, completely at random, in the middle of Paul Jones's spiel, bringing up the upcoming house show in Greensboro the following week, the Barbarian just strolls right in front of the camera, slams his title down on the podium, perfectly in character, and everybody else just stands there completely no-selling it. I have no idea where the Barbarian was or where he came from. My guess would be the Jonathan. I mean, even Barbarians need to drain the cow every now and then. And then we get this classic Paul Jones moment where, as he's running down the Road Warriors, he goes, "We're going to take out Animal. We're going to take out Hawk. We're going to take out..." Long dramatic pause continues. And then finally he's able to blurt out the name, Paul Ellering. And I was trying to figure out what was going on there during that dead silence. And it finally occurred to me. Of course. Paul fucking Jones would totally blank on who the manager of the Legion of Doom is. Like, you can even see Ivan standing there trying to hold back from laughing. Paul Jones, forgetting who Paul Ellering was. Couldn't remember the name for the life of him. Good old number one Paul Jones. Nobody else like that cat. So then we came back for a six-man tag with Ivan, Warlord, and Barbarian versus Mike Jackson, Steve Atkinson, and the Red Raider. I actually had to pause to get everybody's name here because the graphic flew by in like half a second. I saw a stream of letters flash up on the screen for like a split moment and then they were gone. I believe this may have been a title match, although I can't confirm for sure. I mean, not that it mattered. The Army killed these guys pretty convincingly. Powers of Pain absolutely manhandled these guys. A lot of power moves, just catching them and throwing them around with minimal effort. They spent a great deal of time dissecting Atkinson toward the end. They must have had a bone to pick with him for whatever reason. But they finally put him away with the backbreaker axe handle combo. And then Ivan kept brutalizing Atkinson's dead body after the bell for good measure. You know, it is still amazing to look back and see how much stock they were putting into the Powers of Pain as early as February of '88. And a few months later, it was all for naught. Didn't even get a proper blow after the feud. What a bummer. So then we came back for a J.J. Dillon Ric Flair promo. And, well, normally I'm one to put over Flair's taste for fashion. I had to make an exception this week. Ric Flair in a gray suit with a yellow Lakers baseball cap. Not a good combination. He looked like such a tool. I mean, thankfully his promo made up for it in spades. I don't even remember what JJ said. He was reminiscing about Starrcade 87 or something. But Flair dragged David Crockett over to get a shot at one of the crowd signs that read, "Luger is the new Space Mountain." To which Flair then went off the deep end, calling out Dusty of all people, and saying that things aren't shaping up well for him in the Omni. He's stuck his nose in horseman business, and now he's going to pay the price for it. And if he's wondering what it's like to pay the horseman price, he can ask Luger what it's like to be wide awake in a hospital bed at 3 a.m. while the surgeons are plucking your head with a needle, stitching up your wounds. At which point, probably in one of the more disturbing moments we've seen on Crockett TV in a long time, simply put, Ric Flair was being Ric Flair. He began punching open lacerations on his forehead as he began gushing blood in front of God and everybody. Meanwhile, David Crockett is standing there wincing, trying to hold the microphone out, probably legitimately fearing for his life. Now, it's not the first time we've seen Flair do stuff like this, but there was a level of uncomfort that came with it. The idea of just watching Flair punch himself in the head as a shoot, reopening previous cuts. I mean, the guy's been through a lot over the years. In hindsight, when I look back at stuff like this, it registers differently. I couldn't believe it, though. Like, his face was a crimson mask by the time this was over. I'd have thought the network would have put the kibosh on that airing. But apparently it passed the sniff test. I don't know, dude. And the only way David Crockett could sell it was by going, "Wow. All right, then. Let's go back to the ring." There's a reason he's Ric Flair, folks. That's all you can say about that crazy motherfucker. Then we had Arn and Tully versus Tony Suber and Larry Stevens. Some fun back and forth with Arn and Tony in the early goings. They actually let Suber get in some offense here on the heel champions. Wasn't a total one-sided beatdown like a lot of horseman squashes are. Ultimately, though, they end up taking over Stevens and then hit him with a slingshot for the pin. But the real conversation here was everything that transpired afterwards. It's Ron Simmons back out of the booth for a promo. And while he's rattling off a few of the babyfaces on the roster and putting over the talent pool, he eventually gets on the subject of Flair, saying he's a great world champion, probably the best this sport's ever seen, but he shouldn't be ducking or underselling Sting, because he might find himself in the wrong end if he lets his guard down. To which we then get Double A interrupting Ron, telling him that if he ever utters anybody's name in the Horsemen again, he will deal with them personally. And things get pretty heated quickly as Mr. Simmons stands his ground and basically asserts himself to Arn, telling him that if he ever comes out and interrupts his interview time again, he'll be dealing with Ron's fists. And that's not an idle threat. And that part in and of itself was great. Just watching a young Ron Simmons stand up to the smug heel and telling him off. Double A standing there totally shell-shocked, like, did this motherfucker just tell me to fuck off? But David Crockett, dude, the biggest mark in the history of wrestling commentary, gets this big jolly grin on his face, totally starts marking out for it, going, oh man, this is great. He sure told you, Arn. You should see your face. I like that one. I'm sitting at my computer, howling, laughing my ass off, just thinking to myself, if I'm Arn Anderson right now, I'm slapping this guy across the head as hard as I possibly can. I can't even begin to describe what David Crockett is like on this show. He's like the little toady that has to twist the knife further into the back of all the heels that get humiliated. Just rubbing it in, making sure the heel knows that he got told off. This man never fails to be a national treasure. From there, we got Barry Windham and Lex Luger versus Barry Colley and Cougar J. With whatever this canned network music was they had for Barry and Luger. Did those guys actually use real entrance music together? Why don't I remember that? Well, whatever it wasn't the original tune. This is awful. Yeah, a decent little Luger-Windham showcase. Beat up the job guys for a few minutes. It was during a headlock takeover sequence where JR informed us that there's plenty to come on this program, including a Ricky Santana match and a Jive Tones match. Bear in mind, we had about 20 minutes of airtime left by this point. There was so much left to go after this. I have no idea how. I can tell you for sure, it did not fill me with eager anticipation to hear that yet to come was a match featuring Ricky Santana and a Jive Tones tag match. But Luger ended up putting Cougar J away with a rack. Then we came back from break for a Luger-Windham promo, where, well, simply put, they talked for about an hour. More accurately, Luger talked for about an hour. You know what's bad when Luger's midway through his dialogue and then he has to stop himself mid-thought by saying, and I quote, "What I'm trying to get at is," just because he realized he was rambling about God knows what. Even he was self-conscious about it. He basically told Flair he knows what he has to do to become World Heavyweight Champion. Promises that there won't be a sixth time for Flair. When Luger wins the title, that'll be all she wrote for Flair's future title pursuits. And, well, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Barry claimed the World Tag titles would soon come to the hands of the Luger and Windham. Not just Luger and Windham, but the Luger and Windham. Yeah, this was not the greatest showcase for Barry Windham and or Lex Luger promos. So then we had a interesting little tidbit of history here. I guess what we would consider a milestone event in the timeline of the National Wrestling Alliance. Although for unfortunate, saddening reasons, it ended up only being for a short-lived moment. Just to kind of set the playing field here, at this stage in his career, 55 years to be exact, he was involved. Former Houston promoter Paul Bosch had retired from active duties in the Houston area, I believe due to some health complications that he'd been undergoing. At the time, I think he was in his mid-70s, and he had basically spent a year away from wrestling altogether until here in 1988, the NWA had hired him as a member of the board of directors, obviously as part of the expansion and helping Crockett Promotions promote the Houston area. You know, Bosch was obviously an important figurehead in that public sphere. So they took a few minutes to run down his career, gave a little bit of a personal backstory there. Former World War II vet, former announcer, former wrestler. You know, JR did a really nice job laying out the format, establishing that it was an honor to have him represent the industry and be on the NWA team. And at the time of the recording, it seemed like they probably had plans to keep Paul Bosch on board for the next several years. Like, he was obviously up there in age, but he was still cognitive. Still had a passion for the business, obviously. But, you know, unfortunately, we get to the following year, and this is playing spoiler a little bit here, but it's an important detail. Paul would actually pass away due to a heart attack. In fact, I think almost a year out to the date of this current taping. It's really sad, you know. You know, whether or not they were ever going to factor in Paul Bosch as more than just a figurehead of the board, it's a shame the whole thing was so fleeting. And again, you know, they said the guy was, 75? I mean, that's not necessarily young. And again, he didn't look unhealthy or mentally unstable here, but, you know, especially when you hear that he had to retire the previous year due to health complications. I mean, they had to know this wasn't going to be a long-term thing, right? And we've been covering some of Paul Bosch's commentary on the Midsouth shows from '83. I mean, he looked old even back then. This is 5 years later. But they went above and beyond to make a huge deal about the announcement. I have to wonder how much mileage they were expecting to get out of having Paul Bosch on the board. You know, especially with what was to come later on in '88 with the Turner buyout and all the financial problems ongoing. Like, Paul had to see the writing on the wall too, right? Especially as a retired promoter. I mean, he was smart to the business. I can't imagine they weren't cluing him into all that. It was nice to see him. Considerably a big deal if you were analyzing it from a business standpoint. But a year later, the story's entirely different. Speaking of stories, let's try to get back on a positive note here. JJ had a story for us. Taking a trip down memory lane as he, Tully, and Arn are hyping up this upcoming six-man tag in the Omni. JJ talks about how Luger and Ole are two of the biggest hypocrites the world's ever seen. Because JJ was there the night the Horsemen hog-tied Dusty and left him for dead. And Luger was part of that mass beatdown, laughing louder than anybody else in the Horsemen. And JJ was there the day they jumped Dusty in the parking lot, and Ole smashed his hand with that hammer, busting it and leaving him totally defenseless. So when Luger, Ole, and Dusty are in that locker room, and they're going over their game plan together, they ought to reminisce about some of those memories and see if they're still on the same page then. How's that for some sadistic mind game fuckery? Good shit. Trying to pin the babyfaces against each other. Yeah, come to think of it, you know, there was that time where Dusty got beat down in the parking lot, Ole, and yeah, you were the one that kind of smashed his hand with a hammer there. Who's going to let bygones be bygones? The thought would come up. And of course, you know, Tully and Arn chimed in with their comments. Arn pretty much explained that we've now reached the point where the babyface locker room is so desperate to take down the Horsemen. Now former bitter rivals are letting bygones be bygones so they can get on the same page and try to eliminate the Horsemen for good. Nobody knows about the Horsemen more than Dusty. But just like every combination that's come across the Horsemen, doesn't matter who they are, the Horsemen always end up being the one to chop them back down and stay on top. That was more or less Arn's message. I'm sure he delivered it better than I could. Just take my word for it. Then we pitch back to the ring for Ricky Santana versus Keith Steinborn. My notes are brief. I will read them verbatim and we will simply move on. Hideously boring. Santana wins with a diving crossbody. Nothing else to add. Nor was there really much to add to Jive Tones versus Alan Martin and Bob Riddle in the main event. Other than me asking the obvious question, we needed to see this match. Why exactly? The answer was because we're paying these guys, so got to get them on the show somehow. Crockett Cup's coming up after all. I mean, they need to fill the ring with as many bodies as humanly possible. And I don't even know how this is humanly possible, but somehow Jive Tones managed to fuck up a double headbutt spot where I believe they outright missed the headbutt to Riddle. You try to go figure that one out. Depth perception. The rest of it was boring action while Shaska spent the entire time calling the fans honkies and suckers. And eventually they won with the double Russian leg sweep after a very awkward-looking double elbow to Riddle's gut. This also followed JR's comment about how Jive Tones' double-team offense was getting more and more impressive as the weeks go by. JR was very professional. He was full of shit, but he tried to be humble. So yeah, this about sucked. As did their post-match promo, where they spent a few minutes running down the Crockett Cup and calling out all the babyfaces. I tuned most of it out, but I did note the giant wad of spit dangling from Shaska's chin while he was talking. It was very unpleasant. So, I mean, they pretty much could have ended the show after that Horseman promo with JJ, Tully, and Arn. Why they needed to subject us to a Jive Tones and Ricky Santana squash? Beyond me. All in all, though, this is a much better show than last week. Still very long. Still kind of hard to sit through at various points. But we had a few standout segments this week. You know, right now they're mostly keeping the house show hype up. But the 88 Crockett Cup is sort of the next marquee event they're trying to promote. As is the Clash of Champions. We shouldn't neglect to mention that. But next week is where they'll kind of notify us with more information about the Crockett Cup. And we've also, like I said, we got the Clash of Champions show coming up soon. So, a couple things to keep on the radar. In the meantime, we'll go ahead and switch over to Midsouth television here. A lot of stuff to get into this week. It was an action-packed episode. A lot of story development, a lot of moving parts in a lot of the key programs, and just within the first 5 minutes, I had like 73 things I tried to rapidly write down during the opening recap. Well, I think the best place to start is going over who wound up joining Boyd Pierce as the guest color guy this week. A local TV executive that helped to sponsor Midsouth Wrestling for whatever the local station was at the time. He spent a few minutes with Bill Watts putting over Midsouth. The sports director talked about growing up loving professional wrestling and how he was proud to have Midsouth be a part of their network. We'll talk about his commentary in a few minutes. But they kind of used it to pitch to their first pre-tape with the boys. Last week's program really centered around the story of the Mid-South tag title match with Andre and Tony Atlas versus Ted DiBiase and Matt Bourne. And we covered the ins and outs of what went down in that match, up to and including Andre getting bloodied and battered by Kamala and Skandar Akbar. So, of course, the Rat Pack's here to gloat about the situation, bragging about the fact that they knocked off the most imposing duo in all of Mid-South. And about midway through the promo, DiBiase calls over Hacksaw Duggan. And this is where things get a little hairy. A little bit of how you say miscommunication with Duggan and DiBiase. He basically tells Ted that he wants confirmation that he was not responsible for bringing out or paying off Akbar to let Kamala take out Andre last week. If there's one thing Duggan doesn't approve of, it's managers. He says the Rat Pack can handle business on their own. They don't need any outside forces helping them get the job done. And of course, DiBiase and Bourne are hearing Duggan out for the most part, but you can see their facial expressions change very drastically. They go from super hot-headed to pretty stone-faced when Duggan brings up the whole Devastation Inc. involvement. And of course, DiBiase lies and tells Duggan, well, no, of course we didn't pay off Akbar to come down and help. Well, that'd be ridiculous. So, tension is obviously brewing here amongst the Rat Pack. That slow burn Duggan babyface turn. We're starting to enter the next chapter here. And we'll see how it continually evolves as the weeks go by. I did write down a great line from Duggan here as he was ranting about Devastation Inc. He goes, Akbar's been taking care of that Iron Sheik character that had something to do with Iran. And that part in and of itself was fantastic. But if you watch DiBiase and Bourne's reaction when Duggan mentions Sheik and Iran, you see them kind of jolt backwards, like getting taken aback by the comment. Like, whoa, Hacksaw. That's pushing the envelope a little bit there, buddy. Let's simmer down a little bit. Let's not get political here. So we're off to a great start already. Classic Hacksaw Duggan line right there. That Iron Sheik character had something to do with Iran. I don't know what it is, but it was something devious. So from there, we pitch back to the ring for the opening match. Now with Buddy Nichols, the TV executive on commentary with Boyd. And, well, he certainly commented on some stuff. The match was Tom Ernesto Jr. versus Art Cruz. Already not really giving him a whole lot to work with in terms of material. My commentary would have been, well, these guys are jobbers anyway, so how's about we all get up and see what's happening at the concession stand? Now, the problem is he really didn't have a whole lot of insight on the backgrounds of any of the talent here, so his commentary basically amounted to him calling every single spot, up to and including the moments both men were breathing. And most of what they did was very basic to begin with. And then Art Cruz got a little excited toward the end there and started slipping on his comeback. My final bullet point reads, Art wins with something that looked like a swinging neck breaker, but was not really. Never a good sign. And the rest of Buddy's commentary was by and large feckless. But then we come back to one of the more amazing segments on the show. Not necessarily because of the angle per se, but purely by the way Bill Watts laid everything out. Now, of course, let me backpedal for a minute here. If you've been following my channel for the last few years, the Freebirds Von Erich cage match angle from Christmas Star Wars 82 is not a newfound concept here. I mean, we've discussed that angle forward, backward, sideways, and every which way, multiple times over. We've done the whole timeline from that point through the remainder of the Freebirds run in Dallas when they were at their height with the feud with the Von Erichs. But of course, because we're talking about Midsouth from 83 at the moment, this was a very timely event. So it was front and center in the news headlines. The amazing part here is just hearing the way Bill Watts laid everything out. He's not even attempting to be impartial with his commentary. Like right from the jump, he's sitting there explaining his entire agenda. He says, I don't believe in the notion that people can change their stripes. I don't believe in this bullshit idea that people can become good when they've spent their entire lives being miserable human beings. I think people are who they are, and nothing can ever change that. No matter how much they try to pull the wool over people's eyes. And we've already heard Watts basically call out Michael Hayes on TV before, calling him everything but an outright raging homosexual, making fun of the look, making fun of his over-the-top personality. Like, Watts is not someone to shy away from speaking on his hatred for the Freebirds. So the whole thing was Watts basically doing his I told you so speech. And of course they replay almost the entire last two-thirds of the match. Up through the cage door slam from Gordy to Kerry. Ric Flair crawling out of the cage a bloody mess. All the referees attending to Kerry, who was selling the injured head. Again, we talked about this so many times during our world-class reviews. I'm not going to bullet point by bullet point every single detail of the match again. But you can just hear the disgust in Watts' voice when he has to recap everything here. Making it clear that he despises everything about the Freebirds and what they represent. And he's fully behind the Von Erichs, getting their revenge on those no-good sissies. I love this man. Cowboy Bill Watts is the real deal. Let me tell you. Then we have this Marty Lundy Mr. Wrestling 2 match, which is awesome. I mean, it's easy enough for me to call Wrestling 2 the real deal, but I don't want to undervalue Double A. He may have been Marty Lundy in 1983, but behind that name was a fucking badass with so much future potential. Like, man, even watching the way he sold during his matches at this point, like, he already had that skill mastered under his belt. Feeding great for 2 here, making 2's life easy to work with. Now, of course, the big talking point here was Watts mentioning the upcoming North American title tournament on March 21st. That'll be happening in New Orleans, noting that Wrestling 2 would be a part of that tournament to crown a new champion. And they actually drew a couple intermingling storylines together here as we come out of this Wrestling 2 match. Again, great attention to detail here from Watts as he's formatting the shows. Like, we all know about the ongoing story of Wrestling 2 being threatened by this mysterious guy with cryptic notes being sent to him. We still haven't figured out the identity yet. However, in addition to 2 having people making threats, JYD is also receiving cryptic messages. Someone had apparently told him to watch his back because his problems don't deal with people that are currently standing across the ring from him. Now, he's got problems outside the walls of the Irish McNeil Boys Club right now. So now Dog's got problems from mystery stalkers himself. Now, of course, it didn't affect this match any. He was still the Dog, beating up Sonny Rogers in fairly short order here. At least Rogers finally ditched the ugly polka dot ring trunks. That might have been Dog that put the kibosh on that. Probably told Sonny, I ain't working with you until you get a normal pair of ring trunks, dude. Now, of course, that wasn't the only thing that happened here. We did get our answer to whoever made this threat to JYD, telling him to watch his back or watch the back door. I can't remember what Bill Watts said. But, Wrestling 2 and Tiger Conway Jr. had come out to sort of stand guard at ringside in case the numbers advantage became too much. But it wasn't a group attack. Instead, it was a mystery masked man riding out on a motorcycle, which was a very comical visual in and of itself. A man we were led to believe was a masked samurai riding out in style on his fucking Harley. Now, for the record, I had no idea what kind of bike it was, but it was still a funny scene. The other hilarious part here was the moment they do the wide shot to show the masked man running through the back to grab a kendo stick. And you see Sonny Rogers casually try to get out of the ring without being noticed. Like, and obviously because JYD is about to have a face-off with his ninja man. But he was trying to be so inconspicuous about it. Like, he just wound up drawing so much more attention to himself. So what ends up happening is the mystery man does the standoff with Dog. He's going through his whole ritual process with the kendo stick, milking the moment while Dog is standing across the ring ready to go with his collar. And, well, eventually the mystery man leaves, drives off back through the smoky curtain from whence he came. And, as a smart fan watching at home, it was absurdly ludicrous. But these Midsouth fans were mesmerized by everything that went down here. They were so into it. Chanting Dog's name. Not a single person in that crowd was sitting down for this. They were all on their feet, ready for these two to come to blows. And you want to know the best part? Nobody knew who this fucking guy was. We never saw him before. There were no teasers. There were no vignettes. These fans were given no reason to care about who this guy was. But they did. They were ready for this fucking matchup. Tell you that. That's pro wrestling, man. Now, I'm trying to remember offhand. My memories of this early 83 period in Midsouth are kind of sketchy at times. I believe they wind up identifying this man as the Black Ninja a bit later on. I don't remember who worked the gimmick. If he wrestled in other places outside the Mid-South area, he may have used a different name. I think he ends up aligning with Skandar Akbar here, if I'm not mistaken. Now, it wasn't Kaji Muto that worked the Black Ninja gimmick. I think he actually did wrestle as the Black Ninja, but it wasn't here in the States, obviously, because he was the Great Muto when he came to WCW in '89, and they were billing him as Kabuki's son. So, yeah, this is a little tidbit of history that I'm not really well equipped to expand on in great detail. I don't remember who came as the Black Ninja in Mid-South, but he's here now, and he will be feuding with JYD. It's a pretty big spot to be in from day one, sending him right at the big guns. Yeah, I'm interested to see how long they run with the motorcycle gimmick. That may have been a bridge too far here. Then we came back for Ted DiBiase and Matt Bourne versus Tim Horner and Tony Torres. This was the political talk portion of the program where Watts had to bring up Duggan's comment about the Iron Sheik from earlier, trying to draw a reference to the 1979 oil crisis and blame Sheik for being in bed with the Iranian government. Obviously they're really pushing that babyface turn hard at this point. Match here was pretty bad, all things considered. Very rushed, too, you could tell. The sequence with Bourne and Torres at the beginning just didn't click. They didn't seem to be on the same page with what they were supposed to do. A lot of starting and stopping and really weird movement going on with the shoulder tackle and the drop-down spots. DiBiase's contributions to this match were him giving Torres a power slam off the ropes and then pinning him. To my knowledge, I don't think Horner ever tagged in. He just stood there on the apron and watched as his partner got decimated. But hey, pretty easy payday for DiBiase, all things considered. But that's all I really have for this one. Very rushed and very clunky. And that was followed with Hacksaw Duggan versus Tiger Conway Jr. I am still amazed that I'm watching Tiger Conway and Crockett Promotions 5 years out from this point. Like getting wasted away in this fucking dead in the water Jive Tones tag team with Shaska. Like he was awesome in this match here with Duggan. And I say it all the time, man. Duggan's TV matches are always must see. You know, it's never just as simple as him going out there and beating a guy. Like, he actually bothers to tell a story with everything he does. And this worked out well by the end. You know, another case where Duggan goes in underestimating his opponent. He and Conway are having a back-and-forth slugfest for the vast majority of it. And they end up building to Conway's little babyface comeback. Gets a near fall on Duggan, but, you know, when he powers out, Conway lands on Alfred Neely. And this was so brilliant with the way they shot all this. You know, Duggan grabs a handful of Conway and tries to dump him over the top rope to the floor to injure him. But Conway actually lands on his feet. So Duggan goes to revive Neely to try to get him to count him out. But, you know, here comes Conway from behind to keep the fight going. And eventually Duggan hits Conway with a spear tackle and goes for the pin. But instead of Neely counting the fall, he calls for the bell. And that's when he gives the motion that Duggan threw Conway over the top rope. So they waited for the announcement, but he did in fact catch him in the act. So Conway goes over here via DQ. Duggan's obviously throwing a fit about that. Even goes so far as to try to jump Conway after the bell, which is not going in his favor. He ends up getting run off. But it's another genius story element they laid out here. You know, about 20 minutes ago, we heard Duggan stake the claim that the Rat Pack are a unit and they always watch each other's back. You know, they don't need managers to help guide them along. Well, if that's the case, where were DiBiase and Bourne here? Where were they to bail Duggan out of this predicament? Nowhere to be found. They left Duggan to frolic in the wind. Didn't lift a finger for him. Some unit, right? I think Duggan's going to hold that one over DiBiase, but we will wait and see. And then we had a quick standby match to close things out here. Kelly Kiniski versus Joe Stark. Won't spend a whole lot of time on this one. It was pretty uneventful, as are most Kelly Kiniski matches. They had Buddy Nichols back to call this one with Boyd. You know, again, really not much to work with in terms of riveting material. You know, poor Sapp got stuck calling the two underneath matches where nothing of interest went on. And meanwhile, you had all this other exciting action going on throughout the program. Guy was nowhere to be seen for any of those segments. They didn't even do a finish here before the time expiration. Just a very brief way to fill remaining airtime. The final message we got from Boyd here was telling Nichols to come back anytime. My immediate retort was, please don't. At least not as a color commentator. But, you know, outside the extremes of the opening and closing match, the show had a lot of exciting action to it. Yeah, that whole middle portion really hit on all cylinders. The face-off with Dog and Ninja was really good. The Rat Pack stuff is starting to break off and go its own unique direction. You know, Duggan's babyface turns becoming more and more solidified with each passing show. Yeah, they really hit on a lot of stuff this week. And, they still had about another 5 minutes left over at the end of the show. Imagine that. Definitely want to check out if you're looking for good storytelling, if you're in the mood. But we'll go ahead and move over to World Class now. So, interesting story here. I don't know what the hell was going on with my phone on Tuesday night when I sat down to stream the show. I had a lot of buffering issues going on. And I'm thinking it was something happening on my end because, man, all throughout the day, my phone was acting up. Like, apps were running really slow. Things were crashing and not working properly. I was kind of getting pissed off. But yeah, this show took me a long time to get through just because of all the buffering issues. Like, and it wasn't horrendous or anything, but I don't know, minor inconvenience. But it does kind of ruin the enjoyment of watching the shows, you know? Like, everything's stop and start for the entire 45-minute runtime. You just can't get into anything. But I'll try to barrel through this one. I mean, there's honestly not a whole lot to say about this episode. Outside the main event, a lot of it was just pretty standard world-class programming. I mean, they even went back to the well with, let's show an encore feature for a match that literally just aired 1 week ago. Not that recap packages are bad, but I mean, with World Class, they'll at least wait a couple of weeks before re-airing previous footage for matches. This time they replayed the title change from last week's Kerry Von Erich Chris Adams American Heavyweight title match. And, you know, since we literally just reviewed that 1 week ago, I mean, there's no sense in me doing a full breakdown again. The big takeaway there was Adams winning the strap through nefarious means. It was great getting to see all the post-match stuff again with all the fans about to start a riot when Gary Hart and Chris Adams were leaving with the belt. I mean, like, you could literally see fans reaching into their pockets, probably getting ready to go straight for the pocket knife. I'm telling you, man, good thing the boys had thick skin back in the day, because I can't even imagine what it would be like in today's environment if fans were this hostile. Not in the DEI culture we live in today. So the first match we got at the Sportatorium this week was the one-man gang versus Buck Zumhoff, which was, I mean, pretty much everything I expected it would be. Rock and roll Zumhoff's boombox couldn't bail him out of this ass beating. It was funny, even Bill Mercer essentially told Zumhoff to say his prayers because, I mean, he knew he never stood a chance. I mean, to be fair, the guy's a scumbag. It's always fun watching Zumhoff get beat up and ragdolled like a geek. I mean, I never really had much of an opinion on the guy one way or another, so gang destroying him in short order was fine with me. The buffering here got progressively worse the longer the match went. I put the blame solely on Buck Zumhoff for that. He was so horrible, even Peacock couldn't bear to air his matches without malfunction. But that's all there really was for that match. I think the only thing missing from it was Gang destroying the boombox. Instead, he opted to kill Zumhoff with a chain, and it was less exciting. And then after that, we got Gino Hernandez versus Mark Reagan. Not sure if we've seen this Reagan fella in Dallas yet, but, I mean, he had a solid look. Decent size, good body. It kind of had that Rocky King scrappy underdog babyface appeal to him. Obviously, they just used him as job fodder here, but, you know, they didn't totally undercut the guy from the opening bell. They gave him a little bit of shine here against Gino. It was kind of a weird, clunky finish where Reagan gave Gino a hip toss out of the corner, which really didn't look all that great to begin with. And he went for a head scissors takeover, which Gino countered by just kind of dropping him throat first over the top rope. But they both kind of crumbled in a heap. And then from there, Gino kind of took over and beat him with a Russian leg sweep. Again, not really much beyond that. You know, Gino's the Texas heavyweight champion right now, so It was mainly designed to give him a showcase win. Again, the Buff Rangers really annoyed the crap out of me during this segment. Sorry I have to keep mentioning it, but it was a problem throughout the entire show, so, I have to bring attention to it, unfortunately. And then we came back for a Midnight Express promo with Mercer. JC doing his damnedest to get through this one with that scratchy voice. I'm not sure if he was sick or what, but he sounded horrible here. Like, not that his promo was bad, just his voice was completely shot. But, it took a minute to establish that the Midnights are gunning for the six-man tag team championships now. Now that they've linked arms with Rip Oliver, they have a valid claim to enter the six-man title hunt and finally challenge the Von Erichs, step up their game a little bit. Cordy said that Mama Cornette approves of Oliver's services, so that's all that matters. I think he also tried to infer that Sunshine was a slut. But we'll just go ahead and look past that and chalk it up to Corny being a heel. But as we painfully stride through the remainder of this program, TV main event is Beautiful Bobby and Loverboy Dennis versus Brian Adias and Mike Von Erich, with Sunshine and JC in opposing corners. I believe one of the rare times I ever saw Bobby wrestle in a singlet. It was not what I would call an odd look. I guess I just wasn't used to seeing it, so it caught me off guard. But, the big selling point here was the fact that it was Adias' first match back in Dallas in a couple years. God love him for putting up having a team with Mike. By that same token, God bless Dennis and Bobby for gutting through having to work with the guy. What they did was fine. The match didn't stink or anything. It's another example of when you look at the Midnights in Dallas, your first instinct is to wonder, okay, so how in the hell did these guys never find themselves feuding with the Von Erichs for any length of time? Beats the hell out of me. It was on par with a lot of Bobby and Dennis's previous TV matches. They sold and bumped for the first few minutes. Evidently, they wind up cutting off the faces and working their tag team magic together. A lot of rapid back and forth tags, a lot of heavy cheating behind the ref's back, but it's all action. It's fast paced. It keeps moving. I would probably argue they did themselves a disservice by having Brian Adias be the one to sell for the heat portion here instead of Mike. It didn't really drum up a lot of sympathy on Brian, because in the back of my head, my thought was, oh, fuck. This probably means that Mike's going to have to get the hot tag. At least the comeback was short and concise. A couple sloppy windmill punches, and then Brian stepped in and said, all right, man, I'll take it from here. Let's go to the finish. And what was their clever finish, you ask? Well, JC tries to set up Mike for the racket shot behind Bronco's back, but Sunshine cuts him off with a quote-unquote right hand to the jaw, meaning she threw a punch in the general vicinity of Jim's face. I think he did his best to sell it like she connected. I was not blown away by it. And then they did a double team spot where Adias dropped Mike over Dennis with a splash for the 3 count. So indeed, the American Tag Team Champions just lost clean to a first ever makeshift underneath tag team. Sounds like Dallas booking if you ask me. Like literally, like clockwork. Right as soon as they get done with the pre-tape where Corny said his boys are going after the 6-man tag team championships, just like that, beat clean in the following segment to Mike Von Erich and Brian fucking Adias. Can't make this shit up, folks. At the same time, though, why am I not surprised? And after the countless stories of Corny talking about their run in Dallas, I'm not surprised those guys were phoning it in before not too long. You book your top heel tag team to do a job to a first-time makeshift pairing? Mind you, when the Midnights are the current tag team champions in the region. What are we doing? Seriously. Like, even Dusty could figure that one out. I mean, the only good thing about this part of the show is the fact that the buffering wasn't excruciating in the last 10 minutes. I mean, honestly, I think I just needed to do an update with the software on my phone, because it seemed to fix the bug pretty quickly. Lesson learned. Update your Apple software, folks. It makes things run smoother. Not like this show, though. But, I mean, yeah, outside my complaints about the fact that I couldn't really watch it thoroughly, I mean, content-wise, there just really wasn't a whole lot going on at great value. It's probably a blessing in disguise that the buffering was so bad here. At least it interfered with a show that was mostly skippable. I mean, this might have been one of the final tapings they had in the block, so they just said, fuck it. Do a couple squashes, do a main event match that'll send the people home happy, and call it a day. That's the attitude I like to see. When the promoters and bookers are phoning it in, so am I. At least I can give you some entertainment value out of it. Or at least that's the goal. But, yeah. That kind of rounds out another Friday show. Imagine that. Boy, howdy. I haven't even tracked what episode we're on right now. I know we're well over the 200s by this point. Still going at it. Still going at it. All right, so Monday's show. Got to do some pre-planning ahead of time. Just to kind of lay out the gauntlet again. So the Elimination Chamber show is coming up over the weekend. So we're going to skip the SmackDown report now, and we'll have the Elimination Chamber review take the place of that. Retro Raw, Retro NXT will stay the same. I think that's the only swap we're going to make. So hopefully people are cool with that. And bright and early on Saturday, folks. Set your time clocks. 5 a.m., baby. Gym time. Now we'll see. Again, I don't plan on watching it that early in the morning. I'll probably end up catching it a couple hours later on delay, but we'll see. We will see. But thanks for tuning in, everybody. As always, subscribe, comment, like the show, do all that good stuff. Check us out on Rumble, too, if you prefer other video platforming sites. And we'll catch you guys on Monday. Take care. Peace.